Hello, welcome to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All. This is episode 62, The Nature of the Adventurous Mind. And the subtitle is Two Paths Amongst Many. And that's because we're going to talk about the way in which Julie and myself have kind of found ourselves in this adventure. Anyway, this is a series of ruminations we do once a week. We have a short preview on Wednesday evening, usually around 10:30, and then we basically have our main discussion of what that issue is on Sunday morning early. This is 2 o'clock New York City time. So I think what everyone says, why do you do it 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday? It's like, well, it just seemed like the convenient time. And we come home from the Met. We kind of like have been talking, for the course of the week, and it kind of like this may be our Sunday sermon in our secular world. So we've been kind of talking about those things in relationship to nature adventure, and I kind of showed my kind of like well-worn but still poorly understood copy of Whitehead's Adventures of Ideas. To me, like, this is one of my favorite books, and one of my favorite chapters is in the last section of the book on society, where he talks about the nature of the components of what was in civilization. Part four talks about what were the natures of the pieces that were kind of part of civilization and its founding in the classical sense of Western genius. So we talked about truth, beauty, adventure, peace, and then he also adds art. But adventure is probably the one that I kind of feel is the most enjoyable, because it's the one that kind of like has satisfied me throughout my life. And he kind of says a few things that I think kind of are in connection with some of the things we've been saying previously. But anyway, the two pieces that I felt were most important. He says, I suggest that the Greeks themselves were not backward looking or static compared to their neighbors. They were regularly unhistorical. They were speculative, adventurous, eager for novelty. The most un-Greek thing that we can do is to copy the Greeks, for emphatically they were not copyists. And we've talked about copying, we've talked about unique, we talked about original work, and we talked about the idea of kind of transition. One of the things that came up briefly, I want to kind of go back to it, is the idea of kind of the transition from the Western society that included America to what is going to be probably what I call the global society, which is kind of an extension of that Western ideal.
Hello.
I think you see, hi, Pete. I think you see in certain cultures that there's an adoption of Western ideas, liberal ideas, kind of, and there seems to be that consciousness that all those things that are the most progressive, the most liberal, the most kind of like valuable come from that Western idea of genius that we talked about in the century of the genius that Whitehead talked about is the 17th century. Anyway, another thing that he says is impossible for short. Okay. From the three preceding chapters, and with its short explanation as to the peace, let us assume that the moment that truth, beauty, and peace are sufficiently obvious, and the other meanings we will now concentrate upon adventure and art as necessary elements of civilization. It is in respect to these two factors that prevalent concepts civilizations are weakest. The foundation of all understanding of sociological theory, that is to say, of all understanding of human life, is that no static maintenance or of perfection is possible. That axiom is modeled in the nature of things. Advance or decay are the only choices offered to mankind. I think the idea is, as we transition from uh, the civilization that we had that kind of comes from Western tradition and then basically kind of like establishes itself in the United States in the 18th century till now, is transitioning into a global world. And well, less redundant, into a global society. So I think the next empire will not be either the kind of European empire or empires of the American empire, but I do believe that in fact, even those adversarial groups, with maybe the exception of the kind of Islamic world will basically understand that this Western idea, these Western traditions, will be established and kind of like put towards the central focus of that global empire. Um, I don't mean a new world order. I'm not talking about something as foolish as that. I'm talking about the fact that some of these intentions, some of these things, and I think the great thing about the adventures ideas is it's not a prescription for for the potential of building an empire. It's a chronicle of an empire past, but it does show that certain things may be essential, certain things were contextual, and some things are irrelevant. That's basically up to the individuals to kind of like bestow upon their own circumstance and their context. As Ortega said, I am myself and my circumstance. And I think that's something that doesn't change. Add to that the fact that at the same time, Whitehead is talking about process. So I think one of the things that happens in his critique of adventure is the fact that he sees that the adventurous individual had been kind of stumbled by kind of metaphysical preoccupations that we've understood and come to a better appreciation and understanding of, with his help, of course, as terms of like his ideas of metaphysics that basically kind of took us out of a kind of like substantively static mode or a kind of an uninterconnectedness mode and put us in process. So instead of like being, we now are becoming. And I think this is a kind of an essential piece of those things that will allow for these pieces, like we talked about, like you talked about in civilization as their foundations, to kind of move us into the next position. But rather than that, what we'll do is kind of like chronicle to adventurous minds, if indeed we are so. I can vouch for Julie, and I can vouch for her, indeed, adventurous minds. And in fact, anyone who's met Julie, knows that one of the things that is most obvious initially is her incredible beauty. But what was interesting is that my first intrigue, my first interest in Julie was because of that sense of adventure that she engaged with in terms of her thinking. So it was almost as if I was, well, I mean, her beauty was embodied in that very much. But at the same time, the adventure was what made that beauty even more enhanced. Anyway, with that said, the most important part of the program, what's new in Julie? So tell us.
Here's what's new.
Okay.
Would you like to hold it,
Mhm.
Papa? So here is my drawing from today at the Met, and I spent about 2 hours, and I created this entire area in the background, which is a haunting, partially present, psychologically absent, crouching, lurking. I think we might have an angle there. Maybe angle it a little because there's a lot of graphite on it. Gold maquille lacquered picnic set with quite absent people, quite absent food. It is basically lurking in a very haunted, very, very eerie back corner, intentionally at a conflicting perspective. So I photographed it and used that as a reference from a perspective where the viewer is simultaneously at the far right and at the far left, because the perspective of this very large squash-shaped, squash-inspired sake bottle, which does share the same exhibition case and was used, it's a sake bottle obviously for a large party of picnickers, and it actually is in the display, not in any way the way I have composed it, and not at this radical scale shift. The the shift is a surreal shift where what is larger becomes quite minute, and what is smaller becomes Gulliver, which is the word I use for
I like that.
extremely large.
Hmm.
And I photographed one from a perspective of being viewed at an oblique angle from the far right. That is the picnic set. You'll see it here on the screen in reverse, obviously.
Mhm.
And I photographed and used the sake bottle from a partially bird's eye view from the oblique angle at the far left, meaning that the viewer would have to cut themselves in two or clone themselves and be in two places very far removed at the same time, little spooky action at a distance,
Interesting.
to perceive it. Would you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You
Yeah, let me
actually
put
have
this
a lot
down
of
for a second.
of course,
One of
yes.
the things I found about this drawing was this incredible sense of kind of dread and kind of anguish. And I think when I was watching the piece come along, I
Mhm.
loved the way in which this thing started to kind of manifest itself in this character of this individual, which actually, in spite of its size, is actually the menaced individual. Uh, what I find the most successful and
Mhm.
my favorite part is the tremendous um, trepidation and fear and anguish that's caused by this ominous character that seems very close at hand.
Mhm.
You look at something, and I'm going to focus on the piece from the picnic set,
Sure.
and you're going to see this piece.
Yeah, I know it's got
And
a lot of
this
graphite and a lot of
piece
metallic pencil.
seems
That's good.
very close, but somewhat ominous in the fact that you feel as if you didn't understand how, in fact, this came about, that you were this much in danger, but now you're very, very aware of the fact that you are indeed. So, this highly wrought, detailed piece has kind of placed itself uncomfortably close. I often have this dream image where I see myself or I see this ominous character. Now, of course, sure, it's, like everything else, it's fear of intimacy with men. It always is. But
Or maybe not.
what happens is I find myself coming to awareness of a figure that's cloaked, that stands at an uncomfortably safe distance, and I realize that at the point that I recognize and identify it, it has very much been, at least for a certain distance longer than my own, been very conscious and been studying me. So there's that sense of it may be too late. And that's what I kind of sense here, is that this large object, in spite of its size, is very much in a position to be kind of preyed upon by this ominous character. So I think that when you added these pieces today, as well
Mhm.
as this complex perspective, you kind
Mhm.
of brought about this idea of also the fact that not only is this piece in proximity, it also surrounds you at the same time that it's still a singular entity, which I find fascinating. So, with that said, because I think this
Mhm.
very much plays a part in the way in which we kind of have found our particular sense of adventure, we are going to chronicle here two adventures through kind of a decision to kind of pursue beauty and truth in our own lives. So whereas other people may do different things, there was a point where we found ourselves drawn into some kind of spirit. So do you want to start us off?
Well, I could launch from many
Of
points.
course, yeah. So tell us when little Julie is out in the forest drawing on the trees and
Okay, that's a
discovering
good starting
the
point. I'll have
flutterby.
to. Hmm.
Right? Remember, the flutterby was one of
Yeah.
your earliest kind of like le- earliest elements of a discovery.
Yes, it was. Well, here's the story of why I was in the forest in the first place, and I won't give any specific locales because I'm a very private person, as
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yes.
But I'm a city gal and was forced and taken away from the city to the suburbs, which I absolutely loathed. I found them to be bland, without any intrigue, any history, any character,
Mm.
any texture. So the one thing which had vestiges of
Mm-hmm.
any interest, any real adventure,
Mm.
were these patches of very old growth forest
Mm.
that had not been torn down, because these were just, your typical high ranch houses in the suburbs, and they were literally, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky tacky, which was a
Mm.
fun song
Mm.
from the 60s. But um, they had no character. And the only character I found, and it was abundant, were forest adventures. And for one's adventurous mind to
Mm-hmm.
get right back, a forest adventure are trees that are hundreds of years old, where people had carved their names in them not 20 years ago, over 100. And here was the crowning glory: a colonial era garbage dump.
Mm.
And there was a stone wall way back in the woods, and there were pewter dishes. They were pewter. And I would find, because no one else went back there, a bottle of throat tonic with hand blown glass with the giraffe neck.
Mm.
And the actual neck of the giraffe was on the bottle. Now, this would fire my imagination, because these were things of meaning, of true history, of a time that was so far removed from where I found myself temporarily perched. Also, the cobalt blue glass that was very popular in the colonial age, there was quite a lot of it.
Mm.
And one bottle had George Washington's portrait on it.
Mm.
And in these bottles, there remained elixirs.
Mm.
There were still
Mm.
the scrapings and the sticky tar of whatever had been in the bottles. There were forks, there were pewter plates. It was really interesting. And then the final touches, right in back of that, was a whole field of orchids, wild lady slipper orchids.
Mm.
And this, to me, was a world totally apart. This was where my adventurous mind found solace.
Mm.
And that was the first hatching. And I used to take my paint and paint the portraits of all those who had lived and died at that wall, whose belongings I found in the garbage dump. And I painted their portraits all over the trunks of the trees.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my situation starts out different, but the one thing we have in common is we're both born in the city, within the city limits, me in Queens and you in the Bronx. But we, unfortunately, in spite of loving those kind of places,
Yeah.
were taken temporarily in very formative times to these kind of like very sterile, homogenous,
Very sanitized.
sanitized kind of suburbs of mayonnaise sandwiches and tuna casserole.
Absolutely.
So I do remember that, but in fact, one of the things I think I remember was that it was also a forest image. Was that I
Interesting, yeah.
found? I mean, it's funny. We have a colleague who we know at the Metropolitan Museum who coined this phrase, and I've used it because I think it describes me. Is I have, ever since my youngest days, been a great indoorsman. And I think that for me, I found the wonder of the infinite landscape of the exterior inside buildings, which is probably one of the things that fascinated me about being an architect, is that my first adventure into the world outside of my own backyard came through library. The Queens Village Public Library, which was built in 1955, a few years before I was born, was where I engaged in a reading group, and basically at the foot of the librarian who basically taught me the fact that kind of being a misanthrope and iconoclast was acceptable, and that one didn't have to abide by the rules if one had the kind of intention of doing something of consequence. So I had discovered the beauty of the aisles as if they were the kind of clearings of the forest, and the trees were books, and the shelves were full of leaves, and the leaves were the pages of the book. And I found amongst those beautiful things, which was the legacy of our genius, maybe the greatest genius of all, which was Leonardo. And I found this huge book, which I now have a copy of.
I know, it's great.
Thanks to Julie.
You're welcome.
And it was this huge book, which was probably like half the size of me. And I kind of remember reaching for it, and Mrs. Rosen, I believe it was her name, she always wore a big Jewish star, and I kind of asked her what that was, and she told me what it was. I believe her name was Mrs. Rosen. Brought this book down for me, and again, I'm 3 years old. I don't know how to read. I'm 3 or 4. So I remember going through these pages and seeing the fact that there was text and images and all kinds of notation on the same page. So for me, the notebooks were the first true chronicles of the adventures, and I thought, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I want to basically chronicle my adventures. And I found that I had 2 really good friends that were basically best friends. And they were my curiosity and my imagination. And my curiosity had this incredibly adventurous spirit in the fact that it would always love to ask these incredibly intricate, beautiful questions. And my imagination enjoyed trying to entertain my curiosity. So they became my best friends. And my body, my mind was just simply their messenger. I took them to where those actions took place.
That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Puddle. So that was basically my first adventures. And because I didn't live anywhere near a forest, and I wasn't an insect or a forest creature, but I found that I had to adapt to those things. So anyway, that's the beginning of my...
Oh, you have to plug that in. It's about to turn itself off.
Okay.
So should I continue?
Yes.
Well, the forest was very prevalent psychologically for me because of Arthur Rackham, Hans Christian Andersen, Grimm's fairy tales. I grew up with Hans Christian Andersen, also being of Danish descent, being Scandinavian. I was also very much enthralled by and listened to Edvard Grieg, even as a very young child, and Jean Sibelius, both of whom, Jean Sibelius being a Finnish classical composer, Edvard Grieg being Norwegian. While I'm not Finnish, I am Danish, Icelandic, and Norwegian. There is a very long tradition in our Norse lexicon of trolls, of spirits, of elves, of sprites. They have folk and fairy tales that are absolutely fascinating. And there's a plethora of Norse gods and myths and, spirits. And they were very, very much, a lot of the classical pieces are written in the folk and fairy tale tradition. And those melodies, those very notes, live in the minds of most Scandinavians.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting in the fact, another thing that we share is that we both are survivors of that idea of being able to kind of persevere in a desire for adventurousness in environments that were basically very kind of like ill-suited to and kind
I
of
think that's
somewhat,
kind.
that's a kind way.
It is.
Actually, they were
hostile.
They were hostile. Exactly.
Let's
So
just call it
exactly.
a spade.
And the ironic thing is,
Very hostile.
the two, when I think of the two difference, on the one hand, I had this very kind of like superstitious, anti-intellectual kind of
They were medieval.
they were, well, I mean, medieval is actually, I don't think they even rose to the level of
No,
medieval.
it's true.
I mean, I think that there were certain things that took place in the medieval era that were far in advance of, they were superstitious, they were anti-intellectual, they were vindictive, they were envious, they were superstitious. They were certainly not adventurous. They're incredibly cowardly, incredibly uh, uh, selfish, and incredibly scared. I think in your case, you had, though they were more erudite and educated,
certainly.
they certainly did not want to encourage adventure any more than mine did.
Yes, we are self-taught, homegrown adventurers, and it was not instilled in us even slightly. This came from us.
Agreed. I think that all adventurers are self-grown.
Oh,
I mean, just the same way that, like, I think that any life that's real life has to basically be generated from inside itself. And I've talked about how Emerson viewed that. I've talked about how Whitehead spoke about that in Aims of Education. But I think that the reality was, we came to understand that, just as we talked about last week about truth, the reality is the fascination with discovery, following that of the imagination, is its own fascination and its own reward. One doesn't do it to kind of benefit society. One doesn't do it to do anything other than basically just follow that fascination towards its own self-satisfaction. So in my case, when I did get to school and I found the way to kind of like have books, and there was a large playground that was kind of, next to other big open spaces. It was mostly grass, and there were some ball fields and stuff, and it was great because I remember how much I loved recess. I was probably the only kid in the history of my school who actually brought his notebooks to recess, because he didn't have any interest in using his notebooks in the classroom. Now, one of the things that I always remembered was, I kind of found that there were things that I could find. And this, again, I had been delayed in my kind of like desire to kind of follow Leonardo's tradition of making notebooks. But now
you were obstructed.
I were obstructed. Yeah, true. That's true. That's true. So I've now found that in fact, I remember saying I wanted notebooks, and said, you can have coloring books. You get notebooks when you go
not at all
to school.
The same.
No. And it was really hard to make to use crayons to make notes. And I used to draw over the drawings, and I got like in trouble because, like, you're not drawing within the lines.
Because at the time,
that idea was a big deal. Color within the lines. And I was trying to ignore the image on the page so I could put down my own image based on the notes I was trying to make. And I used to ask my mom to give me pencils. She said, you're too young for pencils.
That's absurd.
Anyway, so now I have my notebooks. I go into the playground. And I remember kind of enjoying, kind of trying to make these really crude, amateurish drawings of blades of grass, or kind of like, things I saw in the distance, or houses. And I just loved to sit in the grass and draw. And then I remember one day I was kind of running around, because I always loved to kind of run and pretend that I was a wolf, and I was kind of like, chasing, I never chased anything to catch it. I was just a wolf running, and just kind of enjoyed
adventure.
Yeah, exactly. And I was kind of looking to see what I would find. And one of my first adventures, which was so amazing, was, and I can't tell, I've told the story 100 times, but I love this story, is that I came face to face with a dragonfly. And we almost hit each other. And we had this kind of epiphany where we literally looked into each other's eyes. And I swear to this day, we saw each other and kind of said, "Oh, excuse me, sir." I had no idea. I was not paying attention. And he, as a young dragonfly, was probably off on his own adventure, pretending to be a boy running around in the playground. So he's like, he goes, "Oh, so this is what a boy running around the playground looks like." So then the thing that was amazing was, I, of course, was petrified and kind of stoic and stone and couldn't move. Whereas my colleague, my new friend, went backwards and then vertically. And I said, "Oh my God, I can't do that." And I think that
No
was
one can.
no one can. But that's what I realized. I think I realized something that I didn't realize. That's the connection to the organic architecture. Because remember, I did the lecture that I gave at the Museum of Natural History. I mean, again, about humans not being the greatest architects that that ants are. But the point was that was when I realized the inferiority of humans, because I looked at the fact, because I remember I took that idea and I remember saying, "Oh my God, Leonardo tried to make a flying machine, but he based all his models on birds. What he should have done was base his model on insects because they're much better at flying. Because
he absolutely
because birds fly like a human swims in water, whereas insects basically
forward,
basically just simply move in the air in any direction they want. I said, I think what we should try to do is, and now we have drones that basically fly like insects. But the point was, I was so excited that my adventures had paid off. And I went back into the classroom and got everyone kind of like put their, my teacher said, "Is that your notebook?" I was like, "Yeah." And I couldn't wait to say, I said, "I figured it out. I know what Leonardo did wrong. He should have used an insect, not a bird." And everyone looked at me like, "What is wrong with him?" And my teacher basically said, let me see your notebook. And I was trying to explain to her what I just understood.
Was momentous.
Well, it was. I mean, again, I'm 6, 7 years old. I'm in first or second grade. And I'm like, hey, Leonardo got it all wrong. He should have studied insects. They would have been a much better way. I mean, again,
they are a better model.
And again, it wasn't really a better model. It was just a different model. But the thing is, for a 7-year-old kid, I thought it was pretty cool.
It's very cool.
My teacher then took out my book bag, and she realized, why are you taking your notes, your notebooks out to the playground? And she saw that in my spelling notebook was crude drawings of grass. And in my math arithmetic notebook was like little drawings of ants. And she's like, "You're not taking your lessons. It's like you're using your notebooks as like as notebooks. As notebooks, exactly." And it's paper, like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So she confiscated my notebooks.
God,
called my mother, who then confiscated my notebooks at home.
Wow.
And then I had to basically get my notebook from my teacher every day for each thing, for each class, and then return it to her. And I had to have my book bag checked before I went to recess.
And this is the state of education. It's shameful.
So I was thinking,
and these are the people with no imagination.
I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah, you guys tell me I have to stop doing what I want to do and go to this thing called school to get educated.
If I may point out,
go ahead.
What you were doing was so vastly superior to anything that they were doing. What they should have done is encouraged you and celebrated you. And therein lies the problem with American education. And this was years ago. It's a lot worse now. So,
oh God, can only imagine. They would probably been shackled or drugged. And it would put me on all kinds of medication.
Would have been drawn and quartered.
I probably would have been. I would have been shackled and sedated.
Oh, I'd love to cover
Yeah, go ahead. I'd love to hear it. Yeah, by all means.
So I would love to. It's all on the same topic, but the surrealist mind is the ultimate adventurous mind. And
at the moment.
What?
Yes. I agree.
Yes.
I totally agree.
Yes. What I'm saying is not just the surrealist painters, Max Ernst, Paul Klee, Salvador Dali. You can go on. There were many, many, many. Remedios Varo.
The Marx Brothers?
The Marx Brothers are surrealist minds. I was starting with
Monty Python.
And I was going to get to Monty Python. These are the most adventurous minds. They are the minds that take what is real and make it unrecognizable to illuminate absolute truth in a way that literal-minded, linear writings or portrayals never do. These are the indelible scenes, the indelible essays, stories, novels. Robert Benchley was an author of the 20s, 30s, and the 40s. He died very, very young in the 50s. He was a surrealist, and I discovered only a couple of days ago a writer, one of his contemporaries, named Jack Cluett. And I'm going to say it again, Jack Cluett, because there's not even a Wikipedia page about Jack Cluett. He actually had a radio show at the time. He wrote for television in the early days, and he was a surrealist and a great admirer of Benchley. And that is when you can make absolutely hilarious comments that the best social satire, best political, best personal, best psychological wit is contained in those outrageous and surreal skits and essays and scenarios. So
that seems very true. That's for sure.
yeah.
I think that that's something that one has to take into account. So, tell me one of your favorite adventures as a little person.
Well, one of my favorite adventures, well, actually many of them took place in Chinatown.
Oh, okay.
And I was really very much raised in Chinatown, the real Chinatown,
The Manhattan
the
Chinatown.
Manhattan Chinatown.
Not the one in Flushing.
No, not the one in Flushing, which I don't have any feelings for, any connection to. That's fine, but I don't have any personal feelings for. The Manhattan Chinatown was a city unto itself then. It was a 24-hour place with night markets for exotic fish and vegetables. Everything was still alive. This was not dead food.
True. That's very
this
true.
was so different from a suburban, market. I mean, a supermarket to me was absolutely dull. The A&P or the ShopRite, or I think there was a chain called Waldbaum's. It's probably long since, but I mean everything was packaged and and sanitized. You wouldn't see chickens running around. You would not see fish and frogs and snails and shrimp and crabs crawling and thrashing around in pools of water and in giant tanks. This was utterly different. And I stress it was more like being on a safari, like being at the zoo, like being on some grand exotic adventure. I mean, I might as well have been in a night market in Bangkok or Beijing. It was really that exotic. And one of my favorite adventures,
or Wuhan.
Let's not get into that. Were the apothecaries. And
let me interject one quickly.
Sure.
In fact, I never thought about that, but I mean, the idea of you go into a Chinese restaurant and they would actually have a tank of lobsters and you would eat from the tank. And you saw the fact that things were alive. And in fact, my food was so poor. The food that I grew up on, it was Dickensian. It was so dead. It was kind of hard to imagine now that I think about it, if any of that stuff had ever really been alive.
No, it was so over processed. It really
right.
hadn't.
And it was like, when I think about it, if I was to look at it and kind of put it in my eye and kind of think about what it looked like, it's hard to imagine if it ever had been living tissue in any way, shape, or form.
A lot of it hadn't. I mean,
probably a lot of it hadn't, but I mean, I thought to myself, this was so, even though it was beef in certain ways, for instance, it was so far away from anything that ever resembled a cow or a chicken, and it
even
was just,
your potatoes were not real. Think about it.
No, it was some kind of
they were actually powdered, like reconstituted.
Yeah, there might not have been any potato in there, but I mean, I ate a truckload of those.
Yes.
Anyway, so that was a quick interjection.
Sure. So when I went to the Chinese medicinal, apothecaries, these were fairy tales. These were folk tales. They were the most exotic, eccentric. There were staghorns, frog liver, fish gallbladders. There were eyes from creatures I had never even
Pig's
seen.
feet.
There were pigs. No, that would have been average.
That's true. I mean,
I
most
mean,
people,
that
yeah.
was that they were be in an average market.
Mm.
These things were dried, pressed bodies of
Hmm.
abalones and the famous caterpillar
Oh
fungus.
yeah. It's one of the
Yes,
things that was great was like the
they were
apothecaries. The
transformative
apothecaries were
beings.
actually now the things that were
Yeah,
made into kind of medicinal kind of
yeah.
aspects of the
They were
society. I
the
love
sellers
Chinatown. I
of the
miss Chinatown.
unicorn horn.
I miss Chinatown.
I do too. Let me just
Mm.
say, because I'm,
Mm.
really super tired.
Sorry, Pete.
It's okay. I didn't get a lot of sleep. But this was the place that one would find a narwhal horn. This was the land of the unicorn. This was where one would find the teeth of a chimera. I mean, it was that exotic. You would find eggs that were pickled or fermented of creatures that you had never seen or even heard of.
Hmm.
And the caterpillar fungus, for those of you who don't know, is called cordyceps. And thank you, I'm so tired. And what the cordyceps is there is a fungus that invades the caterpillar of the ghost moth, and what it does is it systematically replaces all of its soft tissues and organs, and it creates a doppelganger and leaves a twisted tail that comes out like a gothic vine, and they're hard as rocks, and they are only from like the highest plateaus in Tibet. They're incredibly rare. They sell for something like $6,000 an ounce. They are still there. And they were thought of as a tonic for long, long life. And there may well be something in that. Many types of mushrooms and fungi are anti-cancer, are promoting a very long
Hmm.
life, and do have rather fantastic properties.
I remember.
So,
I think it was I don't know. We were when we lived in Hanover Square.
mhm,
I remember for some reason I was at the hospital down there, Beekman Downtown Hospital.
mhm.
Do you remember? Was it a kidney stone or
You were
something?
having a kidney
Anyway, and I
stone.
remember going
Yeah.
in there, and there was this Chinese man, and they couldn't tell his age, and he
Oh,
couldn't remember his age.
hmm.
And we kind of estimated it was somewhere in the 200 or 300-year-old kind of. And you get the sense of like these ideas where people were timeless and they had been forever, and
Hmm.
they were thousands of years old, and they had existed on these kind of like ancient kind of remedies that had been passed on forever. Now, I mean, I always enjoyed Chinatown because I was being other as I was. To me, I always felt it's best to be other where I'm identified as other. So being a Westerner in Chinatown, you were always treated with a certain amount of respect. You were basically dealt with cordially and kind of,
It used to
respectfully
be
and
so
reasonably.
wonderful.
The two places in my life, with the exception of Old May's house and Mrs. Schaefer's house, were either in the houses of my Jewish friends or the house or the Chinese people that I met in
Hmm.
Chinatown. I felt that there was a kind of an appreciation because I respected them, so they appreciated me.
Hmm.
And that was always allowed because I was never really welcome in my neighborhood amongst my alleged
Neither was
people.
I.
Exactly. Because,
And neither was I.
as much as there might have been some kind of identification of, well, he's like us in certain ways, that adventurous capacity, that genius capacity was something that was always seen as troubling. Kids could be mischievous, they could be criminal, but they kind of had greater acceptance than I did simply by having an adventurous mind. And it wasn't because I was causing trouble or being mischievous. Now, there were times I did that too, but as I became more of a kind of a interested in my own things and kind of went
And a deeper
a
thinker.
deeper
Bring up
thinker.
the line in The Big Bang is why the children in the neighborhood in Texas hated Sheldon Cooper. And he said, "Oh, they don't know why they hate you." And his
And mother
mother
says, "Oh,
said,
they knew exactly why they hated me."
"Yeah,
Now,
that's exactly
now
it."
in this
Yeah.
case, I wasn't hated. In fact, I kind of found ways to kind of fit in. Sports being one of them. But the
I
idea
didn't know
was,
sports.
I just never felt
Mm-hmm.
at ease around people who I had to constantly pretend to be something I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
The reality was it was impossible to completely conceal myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always great to be a place where no one wanted to care. The
Great.
great thing about Chinatown was you could disappear and nobody knew who or where you were. And I always loved that part.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so.
Well, the other part about Chinatown, and this is a kind of adventure that I think is more specific to me than to Bruce, is a culinary adventure.
Mm-hmm.
That to me towered above almost everything else. I sought out very rare, interesting, and singular foods and ingredients, preparations. I was trained as a Chinese and Southeast Asian chef from a very young age. I can say it, he's not around anymore, by a lovely Chinese gentleman named Howard Chin, who was my cooking teacher and had two very wonderful large twin sheepdogs named Ping and Pong, actually. And he had a taste for absolutely incendiary Szechuan food. And I would
Oh.
hang more to the Cantonese camp. So my adventures were culinary and comical at the same time. And these are the most indelible things that sparked my adventures. I think a lot of people, and this is a really key point, look for adventures in all the wrong places. They are bored with themselves, don't know how to find things that fascinate or stimulate their own minds, and are constantly looking to the outside world, to the exterior, for that next big adventure. And there's a term, a thrill seeker. These are usually, when you actually meet them, and I've met quite a few in my life, very dull people. They have nothing much inside, but are looking for a cheap, fast fix, usually some kind of adrenaline fix.
Yeah, I think what happens is, the thrill seeker is a person who's not connected to the desire to understand. I think that one of the things about an adventurous mind is the adventurous mind is curious, not basically kind of like reckless. And I think that the kind of thrill seeker is reckless. He basically doesn't have the ability. He has a desire to go in search of, but he doesn't go in search of understanding.
It's very undiscerning.
He goes exactly, very undiscerning, and he basically says, "Oh, I'll pick up that snake. I wonder if I can pick up that snake without getting bit."
That's not adventurous.
No, it's just stupid.
Yeah.
But again, one of the things about being boys is that I do, to a degree, understand that level of stupidity. I've engaged in it myself, but I think true. I mean, that's why we have the saying, pulling Bruce from the wreckage.
It does have its merit.
It's happened. And I mean,
happened.
Basically the idea
Probably
was,
wouldn't be sitting here today.
oh, I definitely wouldn't be sitting here today because, I mean, I always felt like it seemed like a good idea at the time, but again, I didn't really think it through. Also, I was kind of reckless, and then later, like I was fearless rather than courageous,
like
because
the
I was
great
too stupid.
Blizzard of '99.
Yes, because I was too stupid to know better.
Mm.
But the thing that was important was, I think, the key to the adventurous mind is the fact that the individual will go in search of, as a result of the need to understand something that to them has merit, has consequence, and it seems essential. It's like, I need to know why that's like that. I think that's the question that I ask myself is like, I need to know why that does that. I need to know why that's like that. I need to know, and there's that necessity almost seems insurmountable. It's overwhelming. You can't look away. You can't
It's a
say I'll do
hunger
it.
and a
It
thirst.
is. It really is. It's a
Yeah.
passion, and you know, um, I think that that's one of the things that can never really be exhausted.
No.
I think
Mhm.
I've often worried. I've often thought about the fact that Prince Mishkin in Dostoevsky's Idiot has this insatiable innocence,
Mhm.
and in spite of the experiences that have put him in this kind of dilemma, he refuses or kind of is incapable of overcoming the
Mhm.
curiosity and imagination that draws him to adventure, and that his innocence is maintained in spite of all the
Mhm.
things that basically could have easily crushed us.
Mhm.
We both have that same insatiable desire for curiosity in spite of incredible harshness and incredible
Yeah.
kind of like
Yeah.
pain and suffering,
Yeah.
because I think we can't
Certainly
remove
hasn't been
ourselves
easy.
from that innocence.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's one of those things that is a choice.
Mhm.
You choose to do it. So anyway, as
Yes.
we're kind of wrapping up
Yes.
here, let me
A
give us
couple
a
thoughts.
good final story or
Well,
thoughts as well.
I believe that
This went
those
so fast.
people, it did. We'll have to do a part two.
Hmm.
When people do not have adventurous minds, and often a positive trait can be best understood or made most lucid by the examination of its negative alter ego. And
Hmm.
in this case, I see people all the time find a term or word that they don't understand. I'm not even talking about a whole concept. Like, I was reading an issue of Science on the subway, and the girl next to me was, looking over my shoulder. I didn't ask her to, and she asked me what a certain word meant.
Hmm.
And I explained it to her, and she looked really scared and moved away to the other side of the car. Now, see, that is very key, because that is indicative of a frightened mind, of a very ordinary mind, of really not an adventurous mind. My adventurous mind had a very different approach. I knew what that word meant, but there was a concept. It was an article on material science, and I, in fact, dove into my own independent research on the topic and wanted to know as much as I could. That's the difference between a
Hmm.
truly adventurous mind and a mind that is shut off to even the most superficial understanding of a new or difficult or challenging idea.
Yeah, I think
Right?
all,
I
yes,
mean,
I
yeah.
agree. I think all people start out as having adventurous minds. I think what happens is people
She must have outgrown hers.
I think you
I
get
don't
it.
know.
I think
Yeah.
society beats it out of you. I
Yeah.
think
Well,
society needs people
yeah.
to, kind of like put bricks up and kind of stock shelves and, fuel vehicles and kind of take oil out of the ground and, do things that make people rich. And
Mm-hmm.
they need workers, and they need people to stock
Mm-hmm.
shelves and do all kinds of
Yep.
things.
Yep.
So I think,
Mm-hmm.
the idea is you can't have, society beats the intuition out of you. It beats the
Mm-hmm.
ambition out of you. It beats the things that they don't want out of you. I believe
Mm-hmm.
everyone has an adventurous soul. Everyone basically kind
Yeah,
of
you
like
start off
has
that way.
those things that they love, that they want to pursue, but it gets beaten out of you. And we've met so many people who kind of say that. But
Yeah.
anyway, we only touched upon this. We'll kind of touch
Yes.
about in part two, was the idea of the energy and the sensitivity of the adventurous mind
Oh,
that we
that's a
kind of,
whole
that
other
was a
thing we
whole other
haven't even
thing. But
gotten
we'll
to.
talk about that, in the next time. We'll
May
kind
I
of do
leave them
this.
with two
Yes, yes.
tantalizing thoughts?
Uh-huh.
In a future episode or in part two, I would very much like to talk about Freud and Laban. That's
Oh
Sigmund
yeah,
Freud, of
because we couldn't
course.
find our volumes.
Yes, that is Sigmund Freud's seminal 1921 work, Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, which talks about the church mind, the the hive mind and the military mind, the individual, the role of a demagogue. It's just a fascinating book. Freud, it turns out, was tremendously inspired in this work by Gustave Le Bon's earlier 1895 book, The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind, which I shall look for getting us a copy of. And then I will end on this, that in general, the French have incredibly adventurous minds in classical music, in cuisine, in literature, in science, and mathematics. So two characters were invented. In 1911, the supervillain Fantomas, and in 1905, the gentleman thief Arsène Lupin, both of whom have had a long, long life in novels and films and cliffhangers. The adventurous mind is most often seen and portrayed as the evil supervillain or the genius of twisted intelligence. So I gave you time to finish.
Thank you, B. So I think we're not all Bond villains.
I happen to be.
Julie happens to be. I mean, I kind of don't. I mean, if I was a Bond villain, here's one thing I would do: when I catch James Bond, right, and I strap him to the table, and I turn on the table saw.
Oh yeah.
I don't walk up the stairs and leave it to my henchman. I am not that. I mean, I didn't become a Bond villain by not paying attention to detail
on an island layer.
Exactly. So I mean, I kind of like had the ability to build an entire island layer without anyone finding out about it.
It's masked,
and I did, and at the same time, I don't pay attention to detail.
Yeah, that's
I mean, like Mr. Bond's like, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die, and I would wait until I saw him.
You would be
have the head severed from his body. And then take all his limbs apart and make sure.
It's more of a family audience.
Exactly. But I mean, I wouldn't. It was just so like I'm like, don't go away, don't go. Oh my God! And there it goes.
They were very inventive and they were very imaginative.
No, they were great people, and that's how I know they did. See, you know how they always have a technical advisor. Yeah. Anytime someone has a Bond villain, they should find someone like Elon Musk, who's not a Bond villain but could have been.
Or Tesla.
Or me.
Or you.
Right? Exactly. Right. It's like, would you have done? No, I would have never done that.
I'm Dr. Snow.
Oh, Dr. Snow. I'd be heat miser. But anyway, so
that's funny.
The realm of idea. Next week, we're going to, let's see, what's the topic for next week? Let's talk about the nature of the adventurous mind. Next week is, educational institutions. That's going to be a bit grim because we're going to go into details. In fact, I'm having a separate conversation with a great friend of mine who's an
entomologist.
He's an entomologist and biologist and a plant scientist. Yeah. And we have some fascinating conversations that we've been doing on Mondays. Yeah. Anyway, so I think this would be interesting. I might kind of roll this in with him because we were talking about the situation so that's it. So next week it'll be educational institutions, and it kind of somewhat follows on what we kind of started today. Anyway, the realm of ideas is free to all, my friends, and it's the benefit of us all for us to keep it just that way.
Swordfish.